Welcome to Creative Conversations on Design TV. I'm Pamela Jacarrino. Today, I'm thrilled to speak with designer Celerie Kemble, who has an extraordinary eye for style and decorating. She has a new book out, Island Whimsy, all about her paradise by the sea, Playa Grande in the Dominican Republic. Celerie, welcome to Design TV. It's so nice to see you.
Oh, it's so nice to be here and nice to see you. Thank you for reading my book and letting me talk more about it.
It's right here. I love
even
it.
after.
I love it so much. And I will let you in on a little secret, which is I am at a rental by the sea. I sold my house and Playa Grande was the inspiration. I had a Pinterest board going and I probably could have just emailed you, but I was like, I have to find out the color that Celerie used throughout. And I Google searched every interview you did. I should have just emailed you. And I landed on Benjamin Moore's lime froth on my walls.
Unbelievable. Well, we wish we'd been able to Google search colors, because when we worked down there, we actually would start with what we thought we wanted, but we had to custom mix everything on the island because we couldn't get Benjamin Moore. So
Yeah.
while they're my go-to paint company and the decks are my best resource, we were actually mixing paint, painting it on our arms, and then running around and holding it up inside the different the different buildings to see if they worked or if they matched. It was especially difficult.
I was so inspired by Playa Grande and what you did there. So when I received the book, I was very excited. I want to talk a little bit about your childhood and where you grew up in Palm Beach. And in the book, you said about your time as a child that much of it was spent, quote, in a damp, sandy bathing suit, your hair crispy with salt, and on a rambling property with a bunch of old family houses surrounded by acres of jungle overlooking part of the Intracoastal. And many of us walk the lake trail in Palm Beach and see this charming and beautiful home that you grew up in. Describe a little bit about how your upbringing sort of shapes your vision as a designer, and how that sort of awareness of place sort of carries with you in your work.
Well, it's really important to my sense of what's beautiful, which is, I think I have a higher appreciation for chaos and patina than most people, because I grew up in an old family property, and my great grandparents, or is it my great great? Actually, it's my great great, were some of the first sort of pioneer settlers in Palm Beach, Florida. And my grandfather grew up in the house that is to the right of where I live. And I live in what was an old church built by the ladies of the town in 1895. And it was built so that people could come by canoe, because we didn't have all the bridges. And at that point, Palm Beach was, pretty much jungle and beach. And my grandfather's house, built by his father, was a kit house sent down on barge, so an old Victorian style house. And my mother, when she was a child, grew up in a house my grandfather built for his wife on the other side of the church. And I wake up and watch the sunsets at night from essentially the same vantage point as my mother, my grandfather, his mother, his grandfather, or his father. I get so many that I get confused. And so do my kids. So that means things are a little bit more decrepit than normal and a little bit more wild, but we all grew up with it that way. And I think it's created a sort of bedrock appreciation for those things in my design.
I feel like it's baked into the Celerie Kemble DNA. Yes.
Well, I've always been a messy haired animal, so I can't help that.
Me too.
But I think that's true garden vernacular or true beach vernacular. So I like to call it authentic, not sloppy.
Here, here. It's also just all of your work. When I look at your work, whether it's an interior, whether I walk into a vignette at High Point, whether it's furniture, textile, it always strikes me as sort of having this strong narrative that's running through it. And I feel like I'm enwrapped in a good book when I look at anything that has your name on it. I'm curious to have you like talk about, do you think of story when you're designing? And obviously I know you're in a service business, you have clients. Although in this instance with Playa Grande, you were telling your own story, but how do you just generally, do you storyboard out everything in your head, or walk us through how that works for you?
Well, I think of everything in design as a conversation, and it's a cliche in our office, but we'll be like, well, how does this sofa talk to the other chairs? And it's using a squishy, lazy, slouchy voice. So it needs to date somebody who's got great posture and who's kind of leggy. And so we'll talk about our rooms as personalities, and each piece has a different tone of voice or a manner. And it's not really an affect, it's kind of how I think about it. It's a way to create balance or juxtaposition, if that's what you're looking for. And now, as I've gotten a little bit better with computer software, and the girls in my office are amazing at it, the last 4 or 5 years, we pretty much put a little picture of everything on one page. So it's a simple tool to see a room the way you would a collage. And again, it's like a conversation. Like, does this all fit together, or does everything look too sharp or too bright, or is everything too neutral? Where's our punctuation? And it's a great tool because a single page does actually affect your response to it the way a room does.
Absolutely.
So
And
it's a good cheat.
it limits you a bit when you're on that, right? I mean, my whole world is like looking at single pages of what's the scale, the balance, and all of that. That's an interesting approach. I want to dive into talking about your new book, Island Whimsy, which is dedicated to your own island design journey. You had a dream or a recreational fantasy of building a group of vacation homes with your friends and your family. And also a vision of sort of like a shared clubhouse that would turn into a boutique hotel. And in 2004, you flew down to the Dominican Republic and set your sights on this gorgeous beach property, Playa Grande. I was curious, and I know that sort of the construction evolved over 7 years. Talk a little bit about, when you arrived and sort of started to think about this fantasy, like what was your vision and how did it evolve over those 7 years?
Well, so back at the point I first heard the word Playa Grande and learned about it was from a Dominican friend of mine who knew that the property, which consisted then of a golf club, the beach, cliffs and mountains, all sort of kind of secluded by the topography because of the mountains. He told my then fiance and I about it, and my fiance was actually the one who was sort of lit on fire in terms of the idea of what could be done. I was reluctant, kind of overwhelmed with what was coming, getting married and work. But we went down, and it's so beautiful, intrinsically beautiful, that there's nothing you can do but kind of roll over and say, if I get to call this a part of my life, I'm all in. But we did spend 10 years, and I gloss over this in the book because there's too much history. 10 years working with master planners and trying to get hotel people involved, and then wrangling our own friends and family as investors to build. So it started with the dream of the big scope. And my book is about the dream of the piece of the project I had the most creative sway over. And it does tie in with the hopes for the whole property, that it would be open and airy and inclusive and sort of excite people to be themselves, not and to connect to the adjoining towns and the Dominican culture, because there's a strong culture there. It's different than some of the Caribbean islands like the Bahamas, or I because it's so large. The Dominican Republic has an almost 10 million person population.
Yeah.
And you can and want to feel that while you're there, at least my friends.
Yeah.
So our goal was to build houses that felt like they belonged and had always been there, but were enchanting to us.
Your first chapter is fantasy, and you had a vision for the buildings that they were going to be like dreamlike in their whimsy. And I wanted to talk to you specifically about like the structures on the property. Some of it reminds me of your grandfather's, like when I walk on the lake to like the fretwork, like when I walk by there, it does feel like there's just some magic that I see in that house. And I just am curious, how did you make that? How did you make the structures in particular? We're gonna get into the landscape and a couple other things later, but how did you make the actual structures appear fantastical, yet also make them feel appropriate to the sense of place?
Oh, this was something we spent a lot of time thinking about, and I worked with a um an amazing sort of barn reconstructive, like historical expert, who had a house down in the Dominican Republic up in the hills, that we actually modeled for our smaller bungalows, because it was a typical Dominican house built to this is the floor plan, was a way of managing windows and light and ceiling height. So we took a very typical Dominican structure and then overlaid it with, I think, a more formal, more fanciful layer of Victorian fretwork. But we did still stick with some of the motifs that the locals use in their houses. There's, they do sort of sunbursts over doors, and sometimes they're like amazing, like rooster designs. And we played with that and refined it so it was a little bit more delicate and elongated. And then I really enjoyed using the sort of vocabulary of garden follies and taking gazebos and louvered shutters to a more I'm trying to find the right word for we put more of the outdoor indoor in the houses. And then we took the structure of the house and made everything a door. So there actually aren't windows other than in the bathrooms and a closet. Everything else is a door outward. So you can pretty much open the whole house. And it was about creating something that married into the jungle, but that really stood out as a delicate folly.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that brings me right into the next chapter, light, salt, and air. And this is also really interesting because your childhood home, when anybody goes on the lake trail in Palm Beach, you walk along and every house has like really tall hedges. Like, you got to peek over and maybe if you want to see anything, except there's only one house that's like, hi, I'm so open and inviting. And that's right, your childhood home, which it's so interesting when you walk on that trail and you see, you feel that. You design the sort of the property to encourage people to bask and dream and frolic, as you say. And it is very open and inviting, as your own home, childhood home was. Did you imagine like a client when you were concepting the design, Celerie, or did you think about like your own family? What was, like, as someone who always has a client to serve, what was in your head?
I was imagining sort of two scenarios. The sort of honeymooning couple and that ultimate escape, like what would delight you enough to just roll you right over into your beach chair and make you understand that all internal switches are off. That was one idea because it was what I wanted. It was what I was starved for. And then I also was fantasizing about kids that I didn't have yet and what would be a place to bring my family and would have the spirit that I wanted my children to grow up with, which is even if your neighbors are strangers or hotel guests you don't know, that you'd be united by some sort of a feeling that it wasn't about privacy, it wasn't about exclusivity. It would be about being awestruck by the horizon, the beach, the sky. It's that we're all small in the face of beauty, and that's, you're united by this amazing feeling. So that was the like overriding need, was to make something that that told you to settle down and be awestruck.
Right.
And
Leave your leave your phone off.
leave your phone off, but was also safe. Like it just would have a casual enough environment that it was like safe and right for a child to go do a big cannonball in the pool, even if there are other people sitting nearby. Like that had a sense of playfulness and freedom. And the lack of hedges was a big part of that. We wanted people not to, kind of hide in their bathing suit and want to be shrouded and sealed off from people on the beach. We were hoping you could watch the locals on the beach, or that there would be I'm always very uncomfortable when it gets us and themy when you're in a resort location and there's a difference between the locals and the tourists and the way they use things. And this was a little bit more like we're all here because what's in front of us is for all of us, and it's awesome.
Another chapter, I'm going in order, is in the jungle. So you talk about in the Dominican Republic, you had to sort of restrain the jungle landscaping while inviting it in whenever possible. How did you sort of manage that tension? In other words, like, so you came in 2004 and here's this property. Like, did you have to carve out what you want? Like, how did you work with what was there? Did you bring anything in? And talk a little bit about just the physical landscape itself and how you worked around that.
Well, where the property, the pool, if you look at the back cover or what you're looking out on the front cover, that was actually, we were all in a parking lot at that point. This was an informal parking lot in the Caribbean where people would drive their cars up to the edge of the beach and they'd leave the trunks open and there'd be music blaring. And it was, it felt like a sort of a parking park right in front of the beach. So there was already an area chosen by the locals because it was a great place to swim and a good access point. And so in some ways, common use is the best dictator of, you have decades of people picking something, it's the way to go. But we didn't cut down any tree that was larger than, I think it was 10 inches in trunk. And that was a rule. We would build around all the trees and hedges. And we also made a point to not block off anything in front of us to the water, which made us hungry for more jungle on the sides. It's, you always need balance. So really things grow quickly there. So while we were figuring out master planning, we started cultivating on some of the adjoining property, flowering plants, and getting sort of almost like a grocery list of different trees and things that smelled good. Like we had lists. Again, this whole thing was like just fantasies. We weren't developers, right? But we did work with a great Dominican landscaper who knew his stuff. We got started years before we had the property, and before we had this location chosen. And then really, it's so fertile there, and it's so wet. Everything grows. Everything grows. So in 3 years, we had flowering vines crawling across the roof lines, and there are royal poincianas, there's jumbo limbos, there's jacarandas. I always think of your name when when I think of the flower jacaranda. But it grows itself after, and then it's just a matter of like pruning and cutting the hair because it wants to get out of control.
Yeah, I'm down here in South Florida, and you could put a royal poinciana. My husband has done it. He's a big landscaper. Like, put a royal poinciana. It's a tiny baby, and then like before you know it, it's this gorgeous canopy of that orange. It's so beautiful. One of the nice parts about it, not so nice, is being here in the summer when it's like 90 degrees and humid. But anyway, Sweet and Dark is your chapter that refers to your approach to color. I'm curious how this color scheme came together, because again, I look at the book, I was so inspired. Honestly, I did like a Pinterest board called Citrus Cabana about this, and it was like this lime froth meets like a faded pale pink espadrille meets Oliver Mizell. So talk a little bit about that. Also, I have to ask, because I have you, like the Celerie Kemble color rules, because you know how to do color very well.
I feel like I'm always making it up as I go, but I love color.
I don't know if I
So,
believe that.
with Playa Grande, when I first imagined it, it was all these sun-faded bathing suits of my grandparents in Bermuda or Palm Beach garden brights. Um, but as we got further into the project and I was looking for fabrics, what also was really appealing to me were some of the like Dutch wax prints and Suzani's and Uzbeki fabrics and all these things that had a more hefty and handmade feeling, and also spoke to the jungle because we're really at the cusp of this, like, it's so brilliant and white and mind-blowing with the sun and the salt and the ocean from one side, and then you turn around, you face the back of your house, and it's shaded, and there are these waxy, brilliant, bright flowered plants and iguanas, and our houses sort of had to be the bridge. So that pushed the color story, and it pushed the interplay of textiles from gauzy linen sheer curtains outside and around the pool to inside in some of like the children's bedrooms, these really pungent and weird color combinations of like, raspberry and charcoal and acid yellow, and the more we put in, the more it accepted it. And again, it's like a little bit like going back to the boards. You're like, this can't work. Oh, yes. And seeing it together, it brought itself to life, and it just worked.
Yeah. And lastly, texture, which is sort of the last, one. I think there's one more chapter, which is sort of your conclusion, but you say that textures sort of settle people into their bodies and focus their senses in a way that little else can. So what materials, you use a lot of different materials here, but are there any like sort of materials that are sort of like your hallmarks or things that you always feel like, I've got to throw into that conversation, I got to throw this in here?
Well, I love wicker and sisal because it's light and it's movable and it's sculptural, and it just, for me, it's the perfect bridge between elegance and ease and comfort.
Yeah.
And it's so informal in the way that you feel right being barefoot. You're okay in your bathing suit. But we also used a lot of concrete tiles which were made down in the Dominican Republic because they take color so beautifully, and it's like that baby powder. If it's pink with baby powder in it, or baby aspirin yellow, or all these things. And it's cool, so it can take the shade, and then you'll feel it immediately on your feet once you hop out of something hot. And the grass is a little prickly. There's coral stone all around, which is rubbly under your feet. I mean, every room is both an assault on the eyes because of the sun and the brightness, and a rest. And then the same with wetness, heat, coolness. I feel like that the whole property is like this really nice conflict. And the other texture that's like overriding and special for the Dominican Republic is the use of tabla de palma, which is split royal palm wood. And that's all over the outside of the houses with a very roughed off patina, which starts the whole story on decay, which is another texture. On every material, there is decay to add, especially in a tropical setting. And we really celebrated that with all the, the copper and the
it's such a it's funny. I sold my house and I'm actually living on the beach, and it's just like when you're like near the water, everything that like that salt just starts to like eat away at everything, and like in a great way. Even like the sea grapes are like, they pop out first, and they're like, I noticed like they're this really gorgeous, like shiny, almost like tanny brown, and they sort of like the sun and the sea get at it, and it sort of like decays. And then, but I love that. I love to see that. I have one final question about the property. So you said it today, you said it in your book, that sort of planning a space, that you like to think about your furniture having conversations. So I had to ask, because I went through the book and looked at a lot of the spaces. What do you imagine that the lovely plum-colored rattan seating in the library would be conversing about? Like, I thought, like, oh, that would be a conversation that I'd love to like eavesdrop in on and see, like, what are they chatting about there?
Well, it's funny. So the library lives under the bar. So
Oh,
there are two very different moments. Upstairs is dancing, tequila, and silliness, and downstairs is a cool repose. And I imagined our library as, a collector's pause, a place to read. And I think that those old rattan sofas, they do look like they could be watching tennis somewhere from a courtside awning. But that sort of dark plum raisin with the zigzaggy wax print fabric on it was definitely a world traveler, somebody who has a sense of irony. And it's sitting there in front of a large coral stone topped coffee table set on two big copper coconuts. So
I love it.
the conversation there is somebody who's seen it all, who's sitting back and is sort of taking it in.
Well, it sounds good. I'd love to be in that space, and the whole, congratulations. I mean, the whole property, the book, it's you just dive into this world and it's just wonderful. I'm going to hold it up again because I'm encouraging everybody to rush out and get, it's been out for a little bit, but anything else that we can hope to see soon from Celerie Kemble or Kemble Interiors? Anything on the docket for next year or?
Well, I've got some new lighting coming out with Arteriors in the fall, which I'm excited about. These are more high point announcements because
That's
I'm about to go down
okay.
next
We
week,
will
so
be
it's in my
there.
head. I have some bedding coming out with Eastern accents, and I've been doing a line with Cherish, taking some of my favorite furniture pieces and making them they're all different fabrics that can be chosen, but I've actually been putting some of my Schumacher fabrics on it. So it's like one of the first times I can marry different pieces of my collection and also show it with vintage pieces the way I decorate. So I can actually just shop and then
I'm
they're
hopping
putting
on
it all
there to
together
see that. Okay,
It's fun.
I'm going to go to Cherish and check it out for sure. Well, thanks so much for being part of Design TV. And again, congratulations on your book. And we're going to look forward to everything else that you always have to do, because it always truly inspires us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another segment of Design TV. I am Shannon Sharp, Lux Interiors Design Home Editor. And today I'm so excited to be speaking to Anita Lang, founder and owner of IMI Design Studio, which is based in Scottsdale, but they do work all over the world. And today she is giving us a sneak peek into a gorgeous Paradise Valley home that was actually on the cover of our November-December issue. And so hopefully many of you got to see the cover, but if you haven't, you're gonna get to see the entire home today. So Anita, welcome. It is so good to see you.
Thank you, Shannon. It's great to see you too. And thank you for inviting me to speak about this home. I love design, so it's easy to speak about this, and thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. And we are so honored to have you here. And I am especially excited to talk to you about this home, which you designed with architect Mark Candelaria, builder John Schultz, and the landscape architect was Bree Pickett. And I know the homeowners, when they approached you, they were coming from a very traditional hacienda style home. And they were like, We want something completely different. And what did they bring to the table with you? Were there any certain requests?
Yeah, that's exactly true. You know, they came from a very Southwestern traditional home and then wanted to go different, and they said modern. And so we know that modern covers a lot of different aesthetics within the design world. So we went deep to understand what modern meant for them. You know, for me, it can mean anything from international style to Bauhaus, and how do they feel it is modern. So we went into a study to understand what they were comfortable with. And what I really found is that they did want clean, simple lines. They still wanted something that had some classical references, so almost a little bit more transitional.
Right.
So understanding that about them helped me understand what the home then needed to be. And then the other thing that was really a philosophy for this house was to make it classic and timeless. So one of the kind of the guiding mantras for the home is that simplicity is luxury. So for us, it was really a study about editing. So I would come up with a plethora of ideas and then kind of come back to what are the bare essence of what we want that house to feel like.
Right. And I feel like when you say simplicity is luxury, I think that you do, part of how you embrace that kind of concept is this home and so many of your homes, I feel like materials are such a central part of your design. I would think you would agree, and I would love, because there's so many fascinating materials that were used here, and I would love to speak to what was used in different rooms.
Yeah, you are right on with that, Shannon. Like, I love materials, and really for me as a designer, and every designer has a little different way of approaching a project. For me, it's about the structure first,
Right.
Understanding the interior architecture, how we're going to sculpt massing within the home and define spaces. And really for me, the structure needs to look absolutely beautiful and evoke emotion already before we even put a stitch of furnishings in it. And to that end goal is materials. Like, that is such an important part of finding materials that are authentic, that create the right mood that you want in the space. So I spend a lot of time with materials and a lot about the way they'll play together, and then how they start and stop and transition, and how they're really sculpting our space. So with this home, it was a really important part. And what was cute about this client is they really had an affinity for grays. However, anything that had a little bit of a yellowish tone to it was like repulsive to the gentleman. So it was really tricky to find something really strong for them. So my solution for that was using the walnut that you notice in the house and this really rich wood. Yeah. So I could give them what they needed in these gray tones that resonate with them, and the house still feels warm and has like a nice overall ambient glow to it, even though there is a strong gray and dark black palette. The other thing that I really was careful about when I was thinking about materials, because the home is so large and you have that big great room, is how do you find things that are the appropriate scale? So I did a leathered Indian black granite on the floors in 24 by 60 inch pieces. So now right away the scale feels more appropriate there. And just was really careful about how we were going to use strong materials, but then also add texture with that in the wood, and then some of the other masonry stone that was used in the house, like that one curved wall that Mark did, which is kind of a signature for the house. It's like this, everything's very linear in that house, very horizontal. And then we have this sweeping, big curved wall that's like 2+ stories. And we did opal schist, which is this beautiful masonry, almost like tumbled looking stone for the texture against the granite floors. So that
I think that what was interesting that I loved so much about that big, because it could be overwhelming if you hadn't used the right textures. And quite honestly, I feel like the right art. You have this beautiful fiber sculpture hanging there, and I like some ceramic pieces at the end. And I feel like that really added a warmth that that made the space feel not overwhelming. And speaking to, what your clients want, as we talked about, they were coming from a very traditional home, And I know that they wanted modern, but were there any risks that you took where they were like, I don't know if we can handle this? I feel like you have you're very bold. You'll make some very bold moves in your design, which is really kind of inspiring. But I don't know if someone who's coming from a traditional home was a little nervous about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think they were a little, tentative on some of the choices I made. And sometimes I think I toned it down a little bit so I would make sure that it was comfortable for them, but
Right.
could push that envelope as much as possible and would feel appropriate for that situation. I was really glad that they did embrace the wood, and it's a deep, rich color. So I think that was a little bit like, trust me on this, it's going to be amazing. And everybody does love it in the end.
Right.
Without that, that house would have felt so different if we didn't have the warmth of the wood, which then I pulled into those pieces. I don't know if you remember in the great room, there's
Yes.
a beautiful, I think it's a sapelli wood then at that point, which has the same tone as the walnut ceiling, those
Mhm.
holly hunt chairs that are overscaled and just really anchor the warmth of that wood. And in
Right.
that case, like the wood is the accent in that setting.
Mhm.
And the other thing with homes often like this that we're working on is understanding the scale that is needed, right? So saying, no, you need a coffee table that's bigger than a king size bed almost, right? I know this seems odd, but you really need it for the space, which
Yeah.
works so well. So I did that custom coffee table in the great room as well. And I think that piece was, I know, every bit of 6.5 feet long. So that's at that point you could really sleep on it or dance on it or whatever is necessary.
I think dancing on it is the best idea. No, I mean, I think that, yeah, I think that's interesting because you did mention scale a little earlier too. And with such a large home, then scale is so important to get it right. And another thing that I'd say is very prevalent to Arizona and other and I'm sure you see this because you work all over the world, but in climates that you're going to have sunshine 360 days of the year. The surrounding environment plays a really important role in design, and I'd love to talk to you about what role that played when you were designing this home.
Absolutely. I mean, it is always important to think about the vernacular of any project, right? Like, and granted, if you're in more of a metropolitan area, you're not maybe relating to what the natural elements are around you as much, but there's still always needs to be a nod of where you're at.
Right.
And in this home, especially so because it's built on the mountainside. And what I loved about what Mark did with this is how he's a master at just using the views at their supreme possibilities.
Right.
And what was interesting with this house, because it was up against the mountainside, on the south side of the house, you'd have this expansive view that like looks across the whole valley. And then on the north side of the house, you're built up close to the mountainside. So the cleft of the stone is having another relationship with the house, which I think is very intimate. And it created a whole nother way of entertaining guests and enjoying that space.
Right.
So when you're thinking about that, one is just even how we embrace the furniture settings for those areas. The other is again about materiality. How does the materials we're choosing, and even though we did do a grayer palette, by the time we started working up towards the mountainside, it felt really good with the stone that's the natural cleft of the mountain.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And yeah, it just gives you different feels. And then like little subtleties, because this is still a desert home. You don't usually think of such a deep gray palette with a desert home, but then we had little nods to it, even in like the botanicals that we used. There's like references to the ocotillo plants and that, so that it does feel like it belongs in this space.
Right. Or even like the dining room where you can look out on that, courtyard garden area, and just that interaction you're having when you're just even enjoying a meal.
100%. Those doors pocket back, and it's like al fresco dining, but a little bit more, easy to manage. But that corner window pockets back, and there's the fountain right there, and the courtyard in the cleft of that mountain. It is really a nice experience.
It seems like it would be a wonderful way to enjoy a meal. I kind of want to wrap up. I wanted to talk to you. Well, I have two questions. first of all, what's your favorite aspect of the house? And this might lead into the next question, which is, how would you say this home reflects your overarching design style?
It's always hard to say what is your favorite. I really do love the way the great room turned out. I love the connection to nature that space gives you with the mountain and then the view on the other side. I love how that space heard what the client needed. Like even the rug has little traditional elements to it, but it feels appropriate in this more modern setting. So I feel like it was a very good example of how successful that home was, in that it has modern lines, clean. It has the gray, it has the warmth of the wood, it has the appropriate scale, and it really did what the client needed it to do at the same time. Their goals of leaving something very traditional and moving into a different type of environment. So I really love the way that space feels.
Yes.
And then to answer like what's indicative of my work, I think a lot is about vernacular appropriateness, respect to the architecture, and then hearing what the clients need and using them as the muse as well for my work and pulling all that together. So, I really use those design principles from line and form to materiality to interior massing, like pull all those pieces together to really make the appropriate solution then. So yeah.
No, that's great. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. This home is stunning. I'm so excited for people to get a inside peek here on DesignTV, and I can't wait to see the newest things. I know that you are busy, as is so many designers right now. So I cannot wait to see the future projects you're working on. And I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Shannon. And you're right, there's so many exciting things on the boards right now. Design is like in a crazy spin, and we can't even keep up right now with everybody and their attention to turn to their homes and wanting to make more of their haven. So yeah, we'll have lots of fun things to share.
Oh, I cannot wait. So you enjoy the rest of your week, and good luck on the many things you are working on right now. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you soon and hopefully getting down to Arizona so we can have a cocktail together soon.
I love that idea. Sounds perfect. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Anita. Bye-bye.
Bye.